My name is Jessica, and I'm 28 years old. Last Tuesday, I received a phone call that shattered my world and changed everything I thought I knew about my parents. They had placed my 5-year-old daughter Emma into emergency foster care while I was on a business trip, claiming they couldn't handle watching her for the week. What they didn't know was that I had already been secretly approved as a foster parent myself, and the same caseworker who took Emma from their house was about to call me with the most ironic twist of fate you could imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as a single mother wasn't part of my life plan, but sometimes the universe has other ideas. When I found out I was pregnant at 22, fresh out of college with a degree in social work, I knew my world was about to change completely. Emma's father, David, had made it clear from the moment I told him about the pregnancy that he wanted nothing to do with becoming a parent. He disappeared from my life entirely, leaving me to navigate this journey alone. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, had always been supportive throughout my childhood. Dad worked as a mechanic at the local auto shop, and Mom managed the front desk at a dental office. They weren't wealthy, but they provided a stable, loving home in our small town of Millbrook, population barely 8,000. When I told them about the pregnancy, their initial shock quickly transformed into excitement about becoming grandparents. During those early years with Emma, my parents were incredible. Mom would come over twice a week to help with laundry and cooking, and Dad built Emma the most beautiful wooden playhouse for our tiny backyard. They babysat whenever I needed to work late, or attend evening classes for my master's degree in clinical social work. Emma adored them, calling them Nana and Papa, and they seemed to cherish every moment spent with their only grandchild. After completing my graduate program, I landed a position with the County Department of Children and Family Services. The work was challenging but fulfilling, helping families navigate crisis situations and ensuring children's safety. My specialty became working with foster families and adoption placements. I had seen too many children bounced between unstable homes, and I was passionate about finding them permanent, loving families. Emma thrived in our small but happy household. She was bright, creative, and surprisingly resilient for such a young child. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment downtown, close enough to my parents that they could pick her up from kindergarten on days when my work schedule ran long. Our routine was comfortable and predictable, which seemed to work well for both of us. About 18 months ago, something began to shift in my parents' behavior toward Emma. At first, the changes were subtle enough that I attributed them to normal grandparent fatigue. After all, they were both in their late 50s now, and chasing around an energetic 4-year-old wasn't as easy as it had been when she was a toddler. Mom started making comments about Emma being too much to handle during longer babysitting sessions, and Dad seemed less patient with her endless questions and boundless energy. I noticed that their offers to help became less frequent. Where they used to volunteer to take Emma for weekend sleepovers, now I found myself having to ask directly, and their responses often included sighs or mentions of other commitments. When Emma would act up during family dinners, something that had never bothered them before, Mom would give me pointed looks and make comments about discipline and structure that felt more critical than helpful. The shift became more pronounced around Emma's 5th birthday last spring. My parents had always gone overboard for her birthday celebrations, but this year felt different. They showed up to her party at the community center with a gift that seemed hastily chosen, and Dad spent most of the time checking his phone rather than engaging with Emma and her friends. Mom helped with cleanup, but kept glancing at her watch and mentioning errands she needed to run. After the party, as I was loading leftover cake into my car, Mom pulled me aside with a concerned expression. "Jessica, honey, have you considered that Emma might benefit from more structure in her life? Maybe some kind of program or activities that could help channel all that energy." The comment stung because Emma was a normal, healthy 5-year-old, whose energy level seemed perfectly appropriate to me. She was excelling in kindergarten, had made several close friends, and her teacher consistently praised her curiosity and creativity. I couldn't understand why my parents suddenly seemed to view these positive traits as problems that needed to be managed. Throughout the summer, the pattern continued. Family barbecues became tense affairs where Emma's natural childhood behavior was met with increasing impatience from her grandparents. When she spilled juice on Mom's tablecloth, what would have once been laughed off became a lecture about being more careful. When she got excited about showing Papa a drawing she had made, his response felt obligatory rather than genuinely interested. I tried addressing my concerns directly with both of them on several occasions. During one Sunday dinner, I gently asked if they were feeling overwhelmed by babysitting duties and whether we needed to make some adjustments to our arrangement. Dad immediately became defensive, insisting that everything was fine and that they loved spending time with Emma. Mom nodded along but seemed unable to meet my eyes during the conversation. The situation came to a head in early September when I was offered an incredible professional opportunity. The State Department of Child Services had selected me to attend a week-long specialized training conference in Denver, focused on trauma-informed care for foster children. This training would significantly advance my career, and more importantly, make me a better advocate for the children I served. The conference was scheduled for the third week of October, and I would need childcare coverage for 5 full days. When I approached my parents about watching Emma during this trip, their reaction was immediate and intense. Mom's face went pale, and Dad started shaking his head before I had even finished explaining the situation. "A whole week?" Mom asked, her voice higher than usual. "Jessica, that's a very long time for us to be responsible for her." I was confused by their response. They had watched Emma for extended periods before, including a long weekend when I had attended a previous work conference just 6 months earlier. "It's only 5 days," I said gently, "and I would make sure she has everything she needs. Her schedule is pretty simple, and she's great about entertaining herself." Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The thing is, sweetheart, we're getting older. 5 days of constant supervision is just a lot for us to handle. Emma is a wonderful child, but she's also very demanding of attention." The word demanding hit me like a slap. Emma was many things: curious, talkative, affectionate, but demanding wasn't how I would describe my daughter. She was generally well behaved and had always been easy for my parents to manage during previous babysitting arrangements. Mom jumped in to soften Dad's words. "What your father means is that we want to make sure we can give Emma the attention she deserves. We just don't think we're the best option for such a long period." I felt a mixture of disappointment and confusion, but I didn't want to pressure them if they truly felt overwhelmed. "I understand," I said, though I really didn't. "Let me look into other options." Over the next few days, I scrambled to find alternative childcare arrangements. Emma's regular babysitter, a college student named Sarah, was available for 2 of the 5 days but had midterm exams the other 3 days. I reached out to other parents from Emma's school, but most were dealing with their own scheduling challenges. The local daycare center had a waiting list for drop-in care, and hiring a full-time nanny for just 1 week was beyond my budget. After exhausting my other options, I decided to have another conversation with my parents. Maybe if I addressed their specific concerns and offered to provide extra support, they would reconsider. I invited them over for dinner on a Friday evening, planning to discuss the situation after Emma had gone to bed. The evening started well enough. Emma was delighted to have her grandparents over and spent dinner regaling them with stories from her school day and showing off a new dance she had learned in her movement class. I watched carefully for signs of the impatience they had been displaying recently, but both Mom and Dad seemed engaged and responsive to her chatter. After I tucked Emma into bed, we settled in the living room with coffee. I had prepared what I thought was a reasonable proposal. I would arrange for Sarah to come by each afternoon to help with Emma's after-school routine. I would pre-prepare all meals so they wouldn't need to cook, and I would check in by phone multiple times each day to see if they needed anything. Mom listened to my entire proposal with a pinched expression before shaking her head slowly. "Jessica, I think you're missing the point. It's not about the logistics or having help. It's about the fact that Emma requires constant supervision and entertainment. She can't just play quietly by herself for more than a few minutes without needing attention or getting into something she shouldn't." I was genuinely baffled by this characterization of my daughter. Emma was actually quite good at independent play and could spend long periods working on puzzles, coloring, or building elaborate structures with her blocks. She was naturally social and enjoyed interaction, but she wasn't the attention-seeking child my mother was describing. Dad leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. "The truth is, honey, we think you might be a little blind to some of Emma's behavioral issues. She's become increasingly difficult to manage, and we're concerned that she needs more structure and discipline than she's getting." The accusation that I was somehow failing as a parent, because I couldn't see my daughter's supposed behavioral problems, felt like a punch to the stomach. I had dedicated my career to child welfare, and had extensive training in childhood development. While I certainly wasn't a perfect parent, I was confident in my ability to recognize and address behavioral concerns in children. What specific behaviors are you referring to? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and professional despite the hurt I was feeling. Mom and Dad exchanged a look before Mom spoke. She's very demanding of attention, she interrupts conversations constantly, she has trouble sitting still during quiet activities, and she gets upset when she doesn't get her way immediately. Every behavior they described sounded like normal 5-year-old development to me. Emma was naturally curious and social, which did lead to interruptions sometimes, but she was generally good about waiting her turn to speak when reminded. She was active and energetic, but she could also focus intently on activities that interested her. And while she certainly experienced disappointment when things didn't go her way, she typically recovered quickly and rarely threw extended tantrums. I tried to address each of their concerns rationally, explaining that Emma's behavior seemed age-appropriate to me, and that her kindergarten teacher had never mentioned any problematic behaviors. But I could see that my parents had made up their minds about the situation. The conversation ended with them firmly declining to watch Emma during my work trip. I thanked them for their honesty and assured them that I would find another solution, but inside I was reeling from their criticism and their unwillingness to help during such an important professional opportunity. That night, after my parents had left, I called my best friend Monica, who lived about an hour away in the next town over. Monica and I had been close since college, and she had always been supportive of my journey as a single mother. She had even volunteered to be Emma's guardian in my will, should anything ever happen to me. I don't understand what's happening with my parents, I confided to Monica over the phone. They used to be so involved and supportive, and now they act like Emma is some kind of problem child who's too difficult to handle. Monica listened patiently as I recounted the evening's conversation and my growing concerns about my parents' changing attitude toward Emma. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. Jess, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but is it possible that your parents are dealing with some kind of stress or health issues that they haven't told you about? Sometimes when people are struggling with their own problems, they have less patience for normal childhood behavior. The suggestion hadn't occurred to me, and I found myself considering whether there might be underlying issues affecting my parents' behavior. Dad had mentioned some back pain recently, and Mom had seemed more tired than usual during our recent visits. But they were both still working full-time and seemed to be managing their other responsibilities without difficulty. Monica continued, the other possibility, and again I'm just thinking out loud here, is that maybe they're trying to send you a message about something else entirely. Sometimes when people can't or won't address the real issue, they focus their frustration on something more manageable. What kind of message? I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. Well, you've been really focused on your career lately, which is great and important. But maybe they feel like you're relying on them too much for childcare, or maybe they think you should be prioritizing Emma differently. I'm not saying they're right, she added quickly, but sometimes grandparents have opinions about parenting choices that they don't express directly. Monica's words stayed with me long after we hung up. Was it possible that my parents' growing impatience with Emma was actually their way of expressing disapproval of my choices as a working single mother? The idea was painful to consider, but it would explain their recent behavior and their unwillingness to support my career advancement. Over the weekend, I found myself watching Emma more critically, trying to see her through my parents' eyes. Was she really more demanding than other 5-year-olds? Was I missing behavioral issues that were obvious to others? I scrutinized every interaction, every request for attention, every moment of age-appropriate silliness or energy. But the more I observed, the more convinced I became that Emma was a perfectly normal, healthy child. She was bright, creative, affectionate, and generally well-behaved. She had her moments of frustration or disappointment, as all children do, but she recovered quickly and rarely held grudges. Her teacher continued to send home positive reports about her academic progress and social development. By Sunday evening, I had made a difficult decision. I would have to decline the Denver training opportunity. As disappointed as I was about missing out on this career advancement, I couldn't find adequate child care coverage, and I refused to leave Emma with reluctant caregivers, who viewed her as a burden.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I called my supervisor on Monday morning to explain the situation. Dr. Patricia Williams had been my mentor since I started working for the county, and she had specifically recommended me for this training program. I expected her to be disappointed, But her response surprised me. "Jessica, before you make a final decision, let me make a few calls," she said. "I might have some alternative solutions that haven't occurred to you." 2 hours later, Dr. Williams called me back with an unexpected proposition. "I've been talking with some colleagues in our foster care division, and we have several families who might be willing to provide respite care for Emma during your trip. These are experienced foster parents who have been thoroughly vetted and trained." The idea of leaving Emma with strangers, even thoroughly vetted ones, made me uncomfortable. But Dr. Williams continued before I could respond. "There's something else to consider, Jessica. You've been talking for months about potentially becoming a foster parent yourself. This could be a good opportunity to see how the process works from the other side." She was right. I had been seriously considering pursuing foster parent certification for over a year. My work had shown me the desperate need for quality foster homes, and I had the training experience and heart for the work. The main thing holding me back was uncertainty about how fostering other children would affect Emma and our established routine. What would the process look like? I asked. Dr. Williams explained that I could begin the foster parent application and training process immediately. The initial paperwork and background checks could be completed within a few weeks, and the required training sessions were offered in an accelerated format for experienced child welfare professionals. If everything proceeded smoothly, I could potentially be approved as a foster parent within 6 to 8 weeks. "The timing actually works out well," she continued. "If you're approved before your Denver trip, Emma could stay with one of our foster families as a respite placement. She would be in the system temporarily, which means she'd be placed with one of our most experienced and trusted families. It would give you peace of mind and give Emma a chance to see what foster care is like from a child's perspective." The more Dr. Williams explained the plan, the more sense it made to me. Becoming a foster parent had always been a goal of mine, and this situation provided the perfect motivation to finally take action. Emma was old enough now to handle the change, and my experience would make me a valuable addition to the foster parent community. I spent that evening researching the foster parent requirements and application process. Most of the criteria I already met through my professional background, education in social work, clean criminal background check, financial stability, and adequate living space. My apartment had 2 bedrooms, which met the space requirements, and my income was sufficient to support both Emma and a potential foster child. The more I read about fostering, the more excited I became about the possibility. I had always wanted Emma to have siblings, and while fostering wouldn't necessarily provide permanent siblings, it would give her experience living with other children, and potentially help children who desperately needed stable, loving homes. Over the next few days, I began the foster parent application process. The paperwork was extensive but straightforward, covering everything from my educational background and employment history to my parenting philosophy and experience with children. I scheduled the required home study visit and signed up for the accelerated training sessions designed for child welfare professionals. Dr. Williams had been right about the timing. Because of my professional background and the expedited process available to county employees, my application moved through the system much faster than typical. The home study visit went well, with the social worker praising my preparation and Emma's obvious comfort and security in our home environment. The training sessions were intensive but fascinating. Even with my professional background, I learned new strategies for working with children who had experienced trauma and for managing the unique challenges that foster children often face. The other prospective foster parents in my training group were an impressive and diverse collection of individuals and couples, all motivated by a desire to help children in need. Emma was curious about my evening training sessions and the changes happening in our home. I explained to her that I was learning about ways to help children who needed temporary homes, and that we might have the opportunity to welcome another child into our family someday. Her response was overwhelmingly positive. Would they be like my brother or sister? She asked during one of our bedtime conversations. They might be staying with us temporarily while their families work through some problems, I explained. So they would be part of our family for a while, but they might not stay forever. Emma considered this carefully before nodding. I think it would be nice to have someone to play with, and if they're sad about missing their family, I could help them feel better. Her compassionate response convinced me that fostering could be a positive experience for both of us. Emma had always been empathetic and nurturing, and I could see how having foster siblings might help develop those qualities even further. 3 weeks into the foster parent application process, I received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was at work reviewing case files when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize, but something prompted me to answer. "Is this Jessica Martinez?" the woman on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Jessica," I replied. "Miss Martinez, this is Karen Thompson from the County Department of Children and Family Services. I'm calling regarding an emergency placement situation involving your daughter Emma Martinez." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What's happened to Emma?" "Miss Martinez, your daughter was placed into emergency foster care this morning after a report was made to our office. I need to meet with you as soon as possible to discuss the situation." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emergency foster care, a report, none of this made sense. Emma should have been at school, then at my parents' house for her usual after-school routine. I had spoken with Mom just that morning to confirm pickup arrangements. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "Who made a report? Where is my daughter now?" Karen's voice was professional but not unkind. "I can't discuss specific details over the phone, but I can tell you that Emma is safe and in a good placement. Can you meet me at our office within the next hour?" I managed to get coverage for my remaining appointments and raced across town to the Department of Children and Family Services office. The irony of sitting in the same building where I worked, but now as a parent involved in a child welfare case rather than a social worker managing cases, wasn't lost on me. Karen Thompson turned out to be a colleague I had worked with on several cases over the years. Her expression was sympathetic but professional as she led me to a private conference room. The manila folder in her hands contained what I assumed was information about my daughter's case, and seeing Emma's name on an official DCFS file made my stomach churn. "Jessica, I want you to know that this situation is unusual, and we're going to work through it as quickly as possible," Karen began. "This morning we received a call from your parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, requesting emergency placement for Emma. They stated that they were unable to continue caring for her, and that she was exhibiting behavioral problems they couldn't manage." The words didn't make sense to me. "My parents called you, but they were just supposed to be picking her up from school like they do every Tuesday. Why would they call for emergency placement?" Karen consulted her notes. "According to the report, your parents stated that they had been caring for Emma for several days because you were out of town on business. They claimed that her behavior had become increasingly difficult, and that they were unable to manage her needs." "That's not true," I said immediately. "I'm not out of town, I was at work this morning. Emma should have gone to school normally, and my parents were supposed to pick her up this afternoon like they do every week." Karen's expression shifted from professional sympathy to confusion. "You're saying you didn't arrange for extended childcare with your parents while you traveled for work?" "Absolutely not. I haven't traveled for work since last spring, and that was only for 2 days. Emma was supposed to be at school today, and my parents were supposed to pick her up at 3 o'clock for their regular Tuesday afternoon babysitting." We spent the next hour piecing together what had actually happened. According to Emma's school, my parents had arrived that morning before school started, presenting a handwritten note supposedly from me stating that Emma would be staying with them for the week due to a family emergency. The school had found this unusual since it wasn't their normal procedure, but they had no reason to doubt my parents' explanation. Emma had been confused by the change in routine, but had gone with her grandparents without resistance. According to Karen's notes, my parents had kept Emma home from school, claiming she was too upset and disruptive to attend. By mid-morning, they had called the DCFS emergency hotline, stating that they could no longer care for her and requesting immediate placement. The most shocking part of Karen's report was the description my parents had provided of Emma's behavior. They had claimed she was aggressive, defiant, and completely out of control. They had described tantrums, destructive behavior, and an inability to follow basic instructions. The picture they painted was of a child in serious crisis, exhibiting behaviors that were dangerous both to herself and others. "None of this sounds like Emma," I told Karen firmly. "She's never been aggressive or destructive." She's a normal 5-year-old who occasionally gets frustrated, but she's not the child my parents described to you. Karen made notes as I spoke, asking detailed questions about Emma's typical behavior, her school performance, and any recent changes in our family situation. As I described my daughter's actual personality and behavior patterns, I could see Karen's confusion growing. Jessica, I have to ask, and I hope you understand why this question is necessary, given the circumstances. Have you been experiencing any personal stress or challenges lately that might have affected Emma's behavior at home? Sometimes children act out in response to changes or tension they sense from their parents. I understood why Karen needed to ask, and I tried to answer honestly. I explained about the work opportunity I had been hoping to pursue, my parents' reluctance to provide child care, and the growing tension I had sensed in their relationship with Emma. But I emphasized that none of these issues had resulted in changes to Emma's behavior at home or school. As we talked, Karen revealed something that sent chills down my spine. Emma was currently placed with the Morrison family, one of our most experienced foster families. Karen had specifically chosen this placement because she knew the Morrisons were excellent with children who had experienced trauma or behavioral challenges. The thing is, Karen said slowly, Mrs. Morrison called me about an hour ago with some concerns about the placement. She said Emma seems confused about why she's there, and keeps asking when she's going home. Mrs. Morrison has fostered dozens of children over the years, and she said Emma doesn't present like a child who's been acting out or experiencing behavioral problems. The pieces of this nightmare puzzle were starting to form a picture that I couldn't fully comprehend. My parents had deliberately removed Emma from school, kept her home under false pretenses, and then placed her into foster care by providing a completely fabricated account of her behavior. But why? What could possibly motivate them to take such extreme and damaging action against their own granddaughter? Karen continued, "There's something else I need to tell you, Jessica, something that might actually help us resolve this situation quickly." She paused, consulting another file.
I see that you're currently in process to become an approved foster parent. In fact, your application is nearly complete. My heart started racing as I realized what she might be suggesting. Are you saying? I'm saying that if your foster parent approval comes through, which it should within the next day or two based on the timeline, Emma could potentially be placed with you as her foster mother, while we investigate this situation and work toward reunification. The irony was almost too much to process. My parents had placed Emma into foster care, not knowing that I was about to become an approved foster parent myself. The same system they had used to remove Emma from our family could potentially place her right back with me, but under entirely different legal circumstances. That evening I sat in my empty apartment staring at my phone, waiting for the call that would tell me whether my foster parent application had been approved. The silence felt overwhelming after years of Emma's constant chatter filling our home. Her stuffed animals were still arranged on her bed exactly as she had left them that morning, and her breakfast dishes remained in the sink, because I couldn't bring myself to wash away the last traces of our normal routine. Karen had explained that the approval process would be expedited given the circumstances, but waiting felt like torture. Every minute that passed was another minute Emma spent confused and frightened, wondering why she had been taken from everything familiar. I kept imagining her small voice asking Mrs. Morrison when she could come home, not understanding why the adults in her life had suddenly turned her world upside down. My phone finally rang at 8:30 that evening. The caller ID showed Dr. Williams' number, and I answered before the first ring finished. "Jessica, I have good news," she said without preamble. "Your foster parent approval came through. All the paperwork is complete. Background checks cleared, and your home study passed with flying colors. You're officially certified as a foster parent as of this afternoon." Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees buckled. "So Emma can come home." Not quite that simple, but close. Karen Thompson will call you within the hour to discuss the placement process. Because this is such an unusual situation, there are some protocols we need to follow, but the goal is absolutely to get Emma back with you as quickly as possible. After hanging up with Dr. Williams, I paced my apartment trying to process everything that had happened in the span of 12 hours. This morning I had been a single mother with a normal routine and loving if somewhat distant parents. Tonight I was a newly certified foster parent, whose own daughter had been placed in care by her grandparents under completely false pretenses. Karen called exactly 1 hour later, her voice more relaxed than it had been during our earlier meeting. "Jessica, I've been reviewing your case file and Emma's situation, and I think we can resolve this fairly quickly. However, there are some legal procedures we need to follow." She explained that because Emma had been placed in emergency care based on a report from my parents, the department was required to conduct a full investigation into the circumstances. This meant interviews with everyone involved, including Emma herself, my parents, Emma's school, and any other relevant parties. The investigation would determine whether the original report was accurate and what steps needed to be taken to ensure Emma's safety and well-being. The positive news is that as an approved foster parent, you can request placement of Emma in your care during the investigation period. Given that you're her biological mother and you've been cleared through our system, this request will almost certainly be approved. "How long will the investigation take?" I asked. Typically these cases are resolved within 30 days, but given the circumstances and the conflicting information we've already uncovered, I expect this will move much faster. "I've already scheduled interviews for tomorrow with you. Your parents and Emma's teacher will also need to speak with Emma, though we'll handle that very carefully given her age." That night I barely slept, my mind racing through possible explanations for my parents' actions. Had they somehow convinced themselves that Emma really was exhibiting problem behaviors? Were they dealing with health issues or personal stress that had affected their judgment? Or was there something more deliberate and calculated about their decision to involve child services? The next morning, I arrived at the DCFS office for my formal interview with Karen and her supervisor, Miss Rebecca Chen. The questions were thorough and professional, covering every aspect of my relationship with Emma, my parenting practices, our daily routines, and the recent changes in my parents' behavior. "Can you think of any reason why your parents would characterize Emma's behavior in such extreme terms?" Miss Chen asked. I had been thinking about this question all night. "The only thing I can think of is that they've seemed increasingly overwhelmed by normal 5-year-old behavior over the past several months. What used to seem charming and age-appropriate to them started being described as difficult or demanding. But I never imagined they would take such drastic action." Karen made notes as I spoke. "Have there been any significant changes in your parents' lives recently? Health issues, financial stress, relationship problems?" "Not that they've shared with me," I replied. "They both seem to be in good health, they're still working, and their marriage appears stable. The only change I can identify is their growing impatience with Emma's normal childhood behavior." The interview lasted nearly 2 hours, covering every detail of Emma's development, our family relationships, and the events leading up to her placement. Both Karen and Miss Chen seemed satisfied with my responses, and their questions suggested they were beginning to doubt the accuracy of my parents' report. After my interview, I was allowed to visit Emma at the Morrison house. The drive across town felt endless, and my hands shook as I pulled into their driveway. Mrs. Morrison, a kind woman in her 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes, met me at the door. "She's been asking about you constantly," Mrs. Morrison said quietly as she led me to the living room. "I've fostered many children over the years, and I can tell you that Emma doesn't present like a child who's been acting out or experiencing behavioral problems. She's polite, well-mannered, and clearly loves you very much." Emma was sitting at the kitchen table working on a coloring book when she saw me. Her face lit up with pure joy, and she launched herself into my arms with such force that I nearly fell backward. "Mommy, I knew you would come get me," she said, clinging to my neck. "Mrs. Morrison is really nice, but I want to come home now. Why did Nana and Papa bring me here?" The innocence in her question broke my heart. How could I explain to a 5-year-old that her grandparents had deliberately placed her in foster care? How could I help her understand something that I couldn't fully comprehend myself? "There was some confusion, sweetheart," I said carefully. "Some grown-ups made a mistake, but we're working to fix it. You might need to stay here just a little bit longer while we sort everything out." Emma's face fell, and I could see her trying not to cry. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why I can't come home?" "No, baby, you did absolutely nothing wrong," I assured her, holding her tighter. "You're the best little girl in the world, and none of this is your fault. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and that's what happened here." We spent an hour together, reading books and talking about her stay with the Morrisons. Emma seemed genuinely fond of Mrs. Morrison and had enjoyed playing with their elderly dog Chester, but she was clearly confused and anxious about the situation. When it came time for me to leave, she cried and begged me to take her home. "Soon, sweetheart," I promised, though my own voice was thick with tears. "I'm working very hard to bring you home very soon." Driving away from the Morrison house was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Seeing Emma's tearful face at the window as I left felt like abandonment, even though I logically knew I was doing everything possible to resolve the situation. That afternoon, Karen called with an update on the investigation. "I've just finished interviewing Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson. Her account of Emma's behavior and development directly contradicts everything your parents reported. Mrs. Patterson describes Emma as a well-adjusted, happy child who has never exhibited any concerning behaviors at school." This news should have been reassuring, but it only deepened the mystery of my parents' motivations. If Emma's behavior at home matched her behavior at school, why had my parents painted such a different picture for child services? "I've also scheduled interviews with your parents for tomorrow morning," Karen continued. "Given the discrepancies we're finding, I expect those conversations to be quite revealing." That evening, I tried calling my parents multiple times, but both their home phone and cell phones went straight to voicemail. I wanted to understand their perspective before they spoke with Karen, to give them a chance to explain their actions directly to me. But their avoidance suggested they knew their behavior had been inappropriate. I finally drove to their house around 7 o'clock, determined to have a face-to-face conversation. Both cars were in the driveway, and lights were on throughout the house, but no one answered when I knocked. I could hear the television playing inside, and saw movement through the windows, but they refused to come to the door. Standing on my parents' porch, being ignored by the people who had raised and supposedly loved me, was a surreal and painful experience. These were the same people who had celebrated my college graduation, who had thrown me a baby shower when I was pregnant with Emma, who had been my primary support system throughout my early years as a single mother. Now they wouldn't even face me after placing my daughter in foster care. I left several voicemail messages that night, each one more desperate than the last. I begged them to call me back, to explain what had motivated their actions, to help me understand how our family had reached this point. But my phone remained silent. The next day brought a breakthrough in the investigation that I hadn't expected. Karen called me at work around noon, with news that changed everything. "Jessica, I've just finished interviewing your parents, and I think you need to know what they told me. Their story has changed significantly from their original report." "Changed how?" I asked, stepping into an empty conference room for privacy. "Initially they reported that Emma had been staying with them for several days while you were traveling for work, and that her behavior had become unmanageable. Today they admitted that you hadn't been traveling, that they had picked Emma up from school without your knowledge, and that their decision to call for emergency placement was made within hours of having her." My stomach dropped. They had admitted to basically kidnapping my daughter from school under false pretenses. "Did they explain why?" Karen's voice was careful and professional. "They claim they were concerned about your ability to properly supervise Emma while pursuing your foster parent certification. They felt that your focus on potentially fostering other children was taking attention away from Emma's needs." The explanation was so shocking that I couldn't immediately respond. My parents had placed Emma in foster care because they disapproved of my plan to become a foster parent. The irony was almost incomprehensible. "There's more," Karen continued. "They also admitted that they had been discussing this plan for several weeks. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in response to behavioral issues. They had been planning to intervene in your custody of Emma because they disagreed with your life choices." The premeditated nature of their actions hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a misguided attempt to help a struggling grandchild or a panicked response to an emergency situation. My parents had deliberately conspired to remove Emma from my care because they didn't approve of my decisions. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Given their admissions and the complete lack of evidence supporting their original claims about Emma's behavior, we're classifying this as an inappropriate removal. Emma can be placed with you immediately as her foster mother while we complete the paperwork to close this case. Relief flooded through me, but it was complicated by anger and hurt. Emma would be coming home, but the damage to our family relationships might be irreparable. My parents had betrayed not just me, but Emma as well, traumatizing a 5-year-old child to make a point about my life choices. I left work immediately and drove to the DCFS office to complete the placement paperwork. The process was surreal, sitting in the same building where I worked, signing documents that would allow me to take custody of my own daughter as her foster mother rather than her biological parent. The legal distinction felt absurd, but it was necessary to protect Emma and resolve the situation properly. Within 2 hours, Karen and I were driving to the Morrison house to collect Emma. Mrs. Morrison had prepared a small bag with the few belongings Emma had accumulated during her stay, and she hugged Emma goodbye with genuine affection. "You take care of yourself, sweetheart," Mrs. Morrison told Emma. "And remember, if you ever need anything, you can always call us." Emma's excitement about coming home was infectious, and she chattered constantly during the drive back to our apartment. She told me about Chester the dog, about the bedtime stories Mrs. Morrison had read to her, and about the other foster children who had stayed with the Morrisons over the years. Mrs. Morrison said that lots of kids stay with foster families when their regular families can't take care of them, Emma said as I unlocked our apartment door. But she said most of the time it's because their mommies and daddies are sick, or having problems, not because their grandparents made a mistake. Even at 5 years old, Emma was trying to make sense of what had happened to her. Her innocent attempt to understand adult motivations that didn't make sense even to adults was heartbreaking. That evening, as Emma played with toys she hadn't seen in 2 days as if they were old friends she had been reunited with, I tried to process the emotional complexity of our situation. Emma was home and safe, which was the most important thing. But she had experienced trauma that never should have happened, and our extended family relationships were probably destroyed beyond repair. Karen called that evening to check on our transition and provide an update on the case status. "The investigation will officially close within the next few days," she said. "Your parents' actions will be documented, and there will likely be consequences for filing a false report with Child Services." "What kind of consequences?" I asked. "That depends on several factors, but filing false reports is taken very seriously. At minimum, they'll be flagged in our system, which means any future reports involving them will be scrutinized very carefully. There could also be legal consequences, though that would be up to the prosecutor's office." The thought of my parents facing legal consequences for their actions brought me no satisfaction. I was angry and hurt, but they were still Emma's grandparents and the people who had raised me. The situation was complicated in ways that legal proceedings couldn't address. Over the next few days, I focused on helping Emma readjust to being home while trying to understand the long-term implications of what had happened. Emma seemed resilient and was quickly falling back into our normal routines, but I knew the experience had affected her in ways that might not be immediately apparent. I scheduled an appointment with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma to ensure Emma had proper support in processing her experience. Dr. Linda Martinez, no relation despite our shared surname, was experienced in working with children who had been through the foster care system. "Children are remarkably resilient," Dr. Martinez assured me during our initial consultation. Emma's experience was brief, and she was placed with an excellent foster family, so the trauma was minimized. With proper support and honest, age-appropriate explanations about what happened, she should recover fully. The more challenging question was how to handle Emma's relationship with my parents going forward. She had been asking about Nana and Papa constantly since coming home, not understanding why they hadn't visited or called. How could I explain to a 5-year-old that her grandparents had been the ones responsible for her placement in foster care? Dr. Martinez recommended a gradual, honest approach. Children need to understand what happened to them, but the explanation needs to be appropriate for their developmental level. Emma doesn't need to know all the details, but she needs to understand that she did nothing wrong and that the adults made poor decisions. A week after Emma came home, my parents finally made contact. Mom called while Emma was at school, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Jessica, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "We know you're angry, and we understand why, but we need to explain our side of what happened." "Your side," I repeated. Incredulous.
"Mom, you placed my daughter in foster care based on completely false information. What possible explanation could justify that?" There was a long pause before she responded. "We were scared, Jessica. We were afraid that you were getting in over your head with this foster parent thing, and we thought Emma would suffer because of it. We thought if she stayed with another family for a few days, you would realize that she should be your only priority." The explanation was so misguided that I didn't know how to respond. They had traumatized their granddaughter to teach me a lesson about priorities they had imagined I had wrong. "Mom, Emma has always been my priority," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Becoming a foster parent was something I wanted to do to help other children, not something that would take away from Emma. And even if you disagreed with my decision, how could you think that placing her in foster care was an appropriate way to express your concerns? "We panicked," Mom admitted, her voice breaking. "When we realized what we had done, it was too late to take it back. We had to follow through with the story we had told, and everything just spiraled out of control." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with my parents alternately defending their actions and apologizing for the consequences. They claimed they had expected Emma to be placed with them temporarily, not with strangers, and that they hadn't understood how the foster care system actually worked. Their ignorance about the system they had chosen to involve was staggering, but it didn't excuse the deliberate false reporting and the trauma they had caused Emma. By the time we hung up, I was exhausted and no closer to understanding how to move forward with our family relationships. That evening, I sat Emma down for a careful conversation about her grandparents and what had happened to her. Following Dr. Martinez's guidance, I explained that sometimes adults make mistakes when they're worried or scared, and that Nana and Papa had made a very big mistake that had resulted in her staying with Mrs. Morrison. "Were they worried about me?" Emma asked, her 5-year-old mind trying to process adult motivations. "They were worried about some changes that might happen in our family," I said carefully. "But they made a mistake about how to handle their worries, and their mistake ended up hurting you." Emma was quiet for a long time, playing with the hem of her shirt as she thought. Finally, she looked up at me with serious eyes. "Are Nana and Papa going to say sorry for their mistake?" The innocence of her question broke my heart. Emma still believed that mistakes were followed by apologies and forgiveness, that adults who hurt children would naturally want to make things right. She didn't yet understand that some adult behavior was too harmful to be easily forgiven, even when apologies were offered. "I think they are sorry," I said honestly. "But sometimes when people make very big mistakes, it takes time to figure out how to fix things." Over the following weeks, my parents made several attempts to contact me and arrange a meeting. They sent letters, left voicemail messages, and even showed up at Emma's school one day trying to see her. Each attempt felt like a violation of the boundaries I was trying to establish to protect both Emma and myself. The school incident was particularly troubling. According to Emma's teacher, my parents had arrived during lunch recess, claiming they wanted to surprise Emma with a visit. When the school staff explained that they couldn't allow unsupervised visits without my permission, my father had become agitated and demanded to see his granddaughter. The school had handled the situation professionally, but Emma had seen her grandparents through the classroom window and had been excited about their visit. When she learned that they had left without seeing her, she was confused and disappointed. That evening, Emma asked me directly why Nana and Papa couldn't visit her anymore. The question I had been dreading had finally arrived, and I knew I needed to provide an answer that was honest but appropriate for her age. "Right now, Nana and Papa need some time to think about the mistake they made," I explained. "When adults make mistakes that hurt children, sometimes they need to show that they understand what they did wrong and that they won't do it again before they can spend time with children." Emma considered this carefully. "How will they show they understand?" It was a profound question from such a young child, and one that I wasn't sure I could answer. How could my parents demonstrate genuine understanding of the harm they had caused? How could they prove that they wouldn't manipulate or traumatize Emma again if they disagreed with my parenting decisions? "That's something the grown-ups need to figure out," I told her. "But until then, you and I will take care of each other, just like we always have." 3 weeks after Emma's return home, I received a formal letter from an attorney representing my parents.
The letter requested supervised visitation rights and suggested family mediation to resolve our conflicts. Reading legal language about my own family relationships felt surreal and heartbreaking. I showed the letter to Dr. Martinez during one of our sessions, asking for her professional opinion about whether supervised visits would be beneficial for Emma. The fact that they're willing to accept supervised visits is actually a positive sign, she said. It suggests they understand that trust needs to be rebuilt. However, Emma's well-being has to be the primary consideration. If she wants to see her grandparents and can handle the emotional complexity of the situation, supervised visits might be appropriate. When I asked Emma if she wanted to see Nana and Papa, her response was immediate and enthusiastic. Despite everything that had happened, she missed her grandparents and wanted to maintain a relationship with them. Her capacity for forgiveness was both inspiring and concerning. I wanted to honor her feelings while protecting her from further harm. The first supervised visit was scheduled for the following Saturday at the DCFS office. Karen would facilitate the meeting, ensuring Emma's safety while allowing my parents to begin rebuilding their relationship with her. I spent the week preparing Emma for the visit, explaining that she would see Nana and Papa, but that a nice lady would be there to make sure everyone felt comfortable and safe. Emma's excitement was palpable as we drove to the office that morning. She had chosen her favorite dress, the pink one with butterflies that my mother had bought her for her birthday, and she clutched a drawing she had made specifically for her grandparents. Her innocent enthusiasm made my heart ache, knowing how much more complicated this situation was than she could understand. My parents arrived 5 minutes after us, looking nervous and uncertain. Dad's usually confident posture was subdued, and Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. When Emma saw them through the conference room window, she pressed her face against the glass and waved enthusiastically. "Can I hug them now?" she asked me, practically bouncing with anticipation. "In just a minute, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my own emotions steady. "Remember what we talked about. The nice lady needs to talk to everyone first." Karen began the session by explaining the ground rules to everyone present. The visit would last 1 hour, conversation topics should remain positive and age-appropriate, and any concerns should be addressed through her rather than directly between the adults. Emma listened solemnly to these instructions, nodding as if she understood the importance of following the rules. When Emma was finally allowed to greet her grandparents, the reunion was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. She ran to them with pure joy, accepting their hugs and immediately launching into stories about her time with Mrs. Morrison and everything she had been doing since coming home. My parents' faces showed a mixture of relief, guilt, and overwhelming love as they held their granddaughter. "I missed you so much, Emma Bear," Mom whispered, using the pet name she had called Emma since she was a toddler. "We missed you every single day." "I missed you too," Emma replied simply. "But I was okay because Mrs. Morrison was nice, and Mommy came to get me just like she promised." The innocence of her response seemed to hit my parents like a physical blow. Dad's eyes filled with tears, and Mom had to turn away to compose herself. Emma, oblivious to the adults' emotional turmoil, continued chattering about her drawing and asking about their dog, Rusty, whom she hadn't seen in weeks. As the visit progressed, I watched my parents interact with Emma and found myself caught between anger and sadness. They were clearly devoted to her and genuinely remorseful about what had happened, but their actions had caused real harm that couldn't be undone by regret alone. Emma's trust and affection remained intact, but mine would require much more time and effort to rebuild. Toward the end of the hour, Emma asked the question I had been dreading. "When can you come to my house again? I want to show you my new books and the puzzle I finished." My parents looked at me helplessly, clearly not knowing how to respond. Karen intervened gently, explaining that visits would continue to happen at the office for now, but that everyone was working towards spending more time together in the future. Emma accepted this explanation with the resilience that continued to amaze me, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand why the adults who loved her couldn't simply go back to the way things had been before. After the visit ended and my parents had left, Karen asked me to stay for a brief discussion about how I thought the session had gone. "Emma clearly loves her grandparents and wants to maintain a relationship with them," she observed.
How are you feeling about moving forward with regular visits? I struggled to find the right words for the complex emotions I was experiencing. I can see that they love her and that she needs them in her life, but I'm terrified of trusting them again. What if they decide they don't approve of some other decision I make as her mother? What's to stop them from taking similar action in the future? Karen nodded understandingly. Those are completely valid concerns. That's why I would recommend continuing with supervised visits for the foreseeable future, and potentially requiring your parents to complete some form of family counseling or parenting education before moving to unsupervised visits. The idea of my own parents needing parenting education felt surreal, but it also made sense. They had demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of appropriate boundaries and child welfare, and some form of intervention might be necessary to prevent future problems. That evening, Emma asked me about the visit repeatedly, wanting to know when she could see Nana and Papa again and whether they could come to our apartment soon. Her persistent questions made me realize that I needed to have a more direct conversation with my parents about the terms for rebuilding our relationship. I called my father that night, knowing that he might be more receptive to a difficult conversation than my mother. When he answered, his voice was subdued and cautious. "Jessica, thank you for allowing the visit today. Seeing Emma meant the world to us. Dad, we need to talk about what it's going to take for me to trust you and Mom with Emma again. Today went well, but Emma being happy to see you doesn't erase what happened." There was a long pause before he responded. "I know that. We both know that. We've made the biggest mistake of our lives, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make it right. I need you and Mom to understand why you thought it was acceptable to place Emma in foster care instead of talking to me directly about your concerns. I need to know that you understand how wrong that was and that it will never happen again." Dad's voice was thick with emotion when he replied. "Jessica, I wake up every morning sick to my stomach about what we did. We were wrong on every level. We were scared and jealous and stupid, and we hurt the two people we love most in the world because of it." His admission of jealousy caught me off guard. Jealous of what? Jealous of your success, your independence, your ability to give Emma opportunities we never could. When you started talking about fostering other children, your mother convinced herself that you were going to replace Emma with kids who needed more help. It was ridiculous and selfish, but we let our own insecurities drive us to do something unforgivable. This explanation provided more insight into their motivations than anything they had said previously. Their actions hadn't just been about disapproval of my fostering plans, they had been driven by deeper fears about their relevance in our lives and their perceived inadequacy as grandparents. "Dad, if you had talked to me about these feelings, we could have worked through them together. Instead, you traumatized your granddaughter and destroyed my trust in you." "I know," he said simply. "And I don't know how to fix that except to prove to you over time that we've learned from this mistake." We talked for another hour, with Dad explaining in more detail how their plan had developed and acknowledging the specific ways their actions had been harmful. By the end of the conversation, I felt cautiously hopeful that genuine change might be possible, but I knew that hope would need to be tempered with careful boundaries and continued vigilance. The supervised visits continued weekly for the next 2 months. Each session showed gradual improvement in the family dynamics, with my parents becoming more comfortable and Emma maintaining her natural affection for them. Karen documented their progress and noted the positive changes in how they interacted with both Emma and me. During this period, my parents also voluntarily enrolled in family counseling sessions with Dr. Martinez, working through the issues that had led to their poor decision-making. Dr. Martinez shared general updates about their progress, noting that they were genuinely engaged in understanding their mistakes and developing better communication skills. 3 months after the first supervised visit, Karen recommended transitioning to supervised visits in more natural settings, like parks or restaurants, where Emma and her grandparents could interact more normally while still having professional oversight. These outings went well, with my parents demonstrating appropriate boundaries and Emma enjoying more typical grandparent activities. The real test came when Emma asked if Nana and Papa could come to her school Halloween party. The event would be unsupervised, but it would be public and time-limited. After discussing it with Karen and Dr. Martinez, I decided to allow them to attend, with the understanding that this was a trial run for more independence.
The Halloween party went perfectly. My parents arrived on time, brought appropriate treats to share, and interacted positively with other families. Emma was thrilled to show them her classroom and introduce them to her friends. Watching them together, I could see glimpses of the loving grandparents they had been before everything went wrong. After the party, Mom approached me hesitantly. "Jessica, I know we still have a long way to go to earn back your trust, but I want you to know how grateful we are for this opportunity. Emma is the light of our lives, and we know how close we came to losing her forever." Her words were sincere, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a genuine softening in my anger toward them. They had made a terrible mistake, but they were working hard to make amends and rebuild the relationships they had damaged. The transition to unsupervised visits happened gradually over the following months. First, brief visits at my apartment with me present in another room. Then longer visits where I ran errands while they stayed with Emma. Eventually we progressed to overnight visits, though these required extensive planning and clear communication about expectations. Emma's resilience throughout this process continued to amaze me. She adapted to each change with remarkable flexibility, never losing her fundamental trust in the adults who loved her. Her ability to forgive and move forward became a model for the rest of us as we navigated the complex process of rebuilding our family relationships. 6 months after the supervised visits began, we celebrated Emma's 6th birthday with her first normal family party since the foster care incident. My parents arrived early to help with decorations and stayed late to help with cleanup, falling back into the supportive grandparent role they had abandoned during their period of poor judgment. Watching Emma blow out her candles surrounded by family who had learned hard lessons about trust and communication, I reflected on how much we had all grown through this difficult experience. Emma had learned that adults sometimes make mistakes, but that love can survive even serious problems. My parents had learned that their role was to support my parenting decisions rather than undermine them. And I had learned that forgiveness was possible even after betrayal, but that it required genuine change and ongoing vigilance. The foster care experience had lasted only 2 days, but its impact would influence our family dynamics forever. Emma occasionally mentioned Mrs. Morrison and asked if we could visit her, showing that her time in foster care had been processed as an interesting experience rather than a traumatic one. My relationship with my parents slowly rebuilt on a foundation of clearer boundaries and better communication. Most significantly, the experience solidified my commitment to fostering. Seeing the system work to protect Emma and reunite our family, even under such unusual circumstances, reinforced my belief in the importance of providing stable, loving homes for children in need. 3 months after Emma's birthday party, I welcomed my first official foster child, a 7-year-old girl named Maria, who needed temporary placement while her mother addressed some health issues. Emma embraced her role as a big sister to Maria with enthusiasm and compassion, showing the maturity and kindness that her own experience had helped develop. My parents, now fully supportive of my fostering work, became additional resources for our expanded family, offering babysitting and emotional support when needed. The irony of my journey becoming a foster parent, while my own child experienced foster care, wasn't lost on anyone involved. Karen often used our case as an example in training sessions about the complexity of family dynamics and the importance of thorough investigation. Dr. Williams noted that my unique perspective as both a social worker and a parent who had navigated the system made me an even more effective advocate for the children I served. Looking back on that terrible Tuesday when I received Karen's phone call, I can see how the experience changed all of us for the better, despite the pain and trauma it caused. Emma learned that she was deeply loved by many adults who would fight to protect her. My parents learned that love requires respect for boundaries and appropriate communication. And I learned that standing up for what's right sometimes means accepting help from unexpected sources and forgiveness from the most generous hearts. The foster care system that my parents had tried to use as a weapon against me ultimately became the tool that saved our family and strengthened our bonds. Emma's brief time with the Morrisons showed her that there are many different ways to create loving families, and that sometimes children need temporary homes while permanent solutions are developed. As I write this story, Emma is now 7 years old and thriving. She has welcomed 3 different foster siblings into our home over the past year, showing each new child the same kindness and acceptance that Mrs. Morrison showed her during her brief stay. My parents have become active supporters of our foster family, providing additional stability and love for children who often arrive with significant trauma and trust issues. The relationship between my parents and me will never be quite the same as it was before they placed Emma in foster care. There's a wariness now, a recognition that people we love are capable of causing profound harm when they act out of fear or jealousy. But there's also a deeper appreciation for the strength of family bonds and the possibility of healing even after serious betrayal. Emma occasionally asks about what happened when she stayed with Mrs. Morrison, and I answer her questions honestly and age-appropriately. She understands that her grandparents made a mistake that hurt people, but that they worked hard to fix their mistake and rebuild trust. Her capacity for forgiveness continues to inspire everyone around her. The most profound change in our family dynamics is the level of communication we now maintain. My parents no longer make assumptions about my decisions or try to influence my parenting through indirect means. When they have concerns, they raise them directly with me, and we work through disagreements with respect and openness. The foster care experience also deepened my professional commitment to child welfare. I now specialize in cases involving family conflict and reunification, bringing personal insight to situations where families have broken down but love remains. My colleagues often seek my input on cases involving grandparents' rights or custody disputes, knowing that I understand both the legal and emotional complexities involved. Emma's story has become part of my advocacy work as well. When I speak at conferences or training sessions, I share our experience as an example of how the system can work to protect children even in unconventional circumstances. Her resilience and healing demonstrate the importance of skilled foster families like the Morrisons, who provide safety and stability during family crises. Most importantly, our experience reinforced my belief that families can survive and even thrive after serious mistakes, but only with genuine accountability, professional support, and a commitment to change. My parents' willingness to acknowledge their errors, participate in counseling, and accept supervised reintegration into our lives made healing possible. Today, as I watch Emma help our current foster child with homework, while my parents prepare dinner in the kitchen, I'm struck by how much stronger our family has become through adversity. The trust that was broken has been rebuilt on a more solid foundation, and the love that survived this crisis is deeper and more intentional than before. The phone call that shattered my world that Tuesday morning ultimately led to growth, healing, and a more authentic family dynamic than we had ever experienced. Emma's 2 days in foster care changed all of our lives, teaching us lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family that no other experience could have provided. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.